Good evening. Thanks for coming. We're delighted to have such a big turnout here in person, another 140 online, and who knows who else will be joining us. And so it's just one of the many enigmas about this book, some of which we'll be discussing tonight. Anyway, our first another look of the academic year 2005 and 6. I wanted to thank again, Cynthia Haven as usual for us. There's Bob Edgar, who is the one who makes sure that our sessions get recorded and get posted on our YouTube channel and the podcast. We have a new collaborator, Alexandra Moore, who is there helping. So welcome, Sasha, to the Another Look crowd. And our donors, I want to mention 3 donors that are 3 graces, Mary Pope Osborne, Antonia Cross, and the most recent one is Katie Gibson. And their generous donations have enabled us to keep this kind of show going. So finally, thanks to the Humanities Center for providing the space and the help for our meetings. And we have 3 panelists with whom I'll introduce shortly. And Sure. But let me first say a few words about the novel that we're going to be discussing tonight. In fact, let me start with this book, Love in the Western World, by Denis de Rougemont, written in the 30s. For me, it's like one of the most important books of the 20th century, but it's a minority opinion that I'm offering there. But let me just read how it begins in order to put the housekeeper and the professor in some sort of cultural context. So he quotes, "My lords, if you would hear a high tale of love and death, we know we could not listen to anything more delightful than this opening of Bédier's Tristan and Isolde, and that it should serve accordingly as a model for the beginning of a novel. It must be an unerring art that can at once thrust us into a state of absorbed suspense, thanks to which narrative imparts the illusion of veracity. Where does the spell come from? And why should our feelings go halfway to meet the emotional effect of such a profound rhetorical device? One thing the tremendous vogue of the romantic novel makes immediately clear: the chord that awakens in us the most sonorous echoes has for its tonic and dominant, so to speak, the words love and death. There are other and more occult grounds for thinking that this is the one clue to the European mind, namely that connection between love and death. And all the great love stories in the Western canon do have a sort of connection between love and death. So for us, I think, one of the challenges is to kind of explain the appeal of a novel which has a very different kind of love, that's at work here. And I'm not sure we have a word for it in English. I mean, English is it's a weird kind of poverty in our words for love. The Greeks had 8 different words for love: philia, eros, agape, storge, I can go on. And unfortunately, we have to make do, with just this one word, love. But it has many different inflections. And I think that the novel that we're going to be discussing tonight has 3 different aspects of love that we should pay attention to. I think one is this very non-Western, non-romantic love that transpires between the housekeeper and the professor and the son, Root. And can't really call it merely affection, because there's something more than just affection that's involved there. It's not even family love, because they're not technically a family, but there's some other, I mean, maybe Indra can speak further to this in her comments about what kind of love this might be, if there's another sort of Japanese inflection for relationships that we're. What interests me even more than that is the love of mathematics that is the, I think, the real center of gravity of the novel. And I'm convinced that it's impossible to become a good mathematician without falling in love with mathematics. I mean, I think the same thing applies. You're not going to be a great Shakespearean if you don't fall in love with Shakespeare, or a great chemist if you don't fall in love with chemistry. But there's some relationship between love and mathematics that seems to be quite persistent throughout the cultural history of the West. There's a book that I bought a few years ago, maybe 5 or 6 years. I couldn't locate it for the life of me, by Edward Frankel, called Love and Math: The Heart of Hidden Reality. And I remember one line from that book, that mathematics directs the flow of the universe. And what I was able to find is a review of it where Jim Holt in the New York Review of Books said, he's also a mathematician, "For those who have learned something of higher mathematics, nothing could be more natural than to use the word beautiful in connection with it." So the connection between mathematics, beauty, and love, I think, is all over the pages of. G.H. Hardy was, he wrote a classic book in 1940 called A Mathematician's Apology, very important book, in which he declared that mathematics was first and foremost a creative act, and that beauty, not usefulness, is the true justification for mathematics. I quote him: "The mathematician's patterns, like the painters or the poets, must be beautiful. Beauty is the first test. There is no permanent place in the world for ugly mathematics." And this was in some ways kind of echoed by Bertrand Russell, although, you know, being British, he was a little colder. And when he said, I think melodramatically, that it was because he wanted to learn more about mathematics that he didn't commit suicide. He was very tempted to do so. And that the beauty of mathematics was, I quote him, "cold and austere like that of sculpture, sublimely pure and capable of a stern perfection." One last important reference about mathematics, beauty, and love is Plato in the Symposium. And the reason I want to bring in Plato is because I think for me, it's abundantly evidence that there's a Platonism, very conventional kind of Platonism, namely idealization of mathematics in the case of the professor, and the idea that mathematics belongs to a higher order of reality, and that one reaches it really through the ladder of love. In the Plato Symposium, you have the famous ladder of love, where you start by loving one physical body, the erotic attraction that you have for one body, and then you realize that the beauty of one body is shared by the beauty of other bodies, so you start loving the beauty of bodies in general, and then you realize that our institutions and justice and other things have a certain kind of beauty which is non-corporeal, as a higher form of love. And so you go through these various, I think there are about 7 or 8 rungs of the ladder of love, and before the ultimate one, which is the ideas, the disembodied ideas that Platonic eros leads to, if followed properly, is the love of mathematics. And with what I wanted to mention about that is that it's the perfect and timeless beauty discovered by the mathematical sciences, which is the object of not the very highest form of love, but the next to very highest form of love. And such beauty in numbers is able to grasp in it a desire to reproduce. And I don't want to go further into this, but there's in every stage, there's this kind of pregnancy in the mind and in the soul to want to give birth to something. And as Plato says, not biologically, but intellectually, by begetting additional gloriously beautiful ideas and theories. And if the discussion allows, I'd like to associate that with the professor's particular love of children. And how there might be this extra dimension of Platonism in the desire to reproduce the love of mathematics, and the way that the professor's love has a contagion on the housekeeper and her son. So with those introductory remarks, I'm going to introduce our very interesting panel tonight. I'm going to begin with Indra Levy, who is a scholar of modern Japanese literature and a professor of Asian languages and literatures here at Stanford, as well as professor of our Department of Comparative Literature. She's the author of Sirens of the Western Shore, the Western-esque Femme Fatale translation and vernacular style in modern Japanese literature. She's also the editor of Translation in Modern Japan, and her current work, as I gather, is focused on humor in Japanese literature, performance, and translation from the late 19th century to the mid-20th. And Rosaley Gai is a doctoral student in the department. I think you're a student of Indra's in that one, yeah. Department of Asian Languages and Literature, and your primary interest is in modern Japanese literature and media. And finally, we were very lucky to kind of at the last minute get Lernik Asserian is a director of the Stanford Undergraduate Research Institute in Mathematics and a Stanford Summer Bridge Program instructor. She has a PhD in applied mathematics from the University of Southern California and is the recipient of a number of awards at Stanford and USC. And although she will come third in the lineup, I would like Lernik for you to actually come up here and say something about the date on which our session is taking place, which was brought to, my attention by Jenny from Sacred Heart. Is Jenny here in person? You are, Jenny, okay. So I got an email this morning from Jenny, which I forwarded to Lernik, and I'm gonna tell us what's so special about September 16th, 2025.
Thank you, Robert. Hi, everyone. So I need a chalkboard, and a mathematician needs a blackboard and a chalk to explain a math concept, but we don't have one here, so I'll just explain it. There was a lot of coincidence in general with this event in particular with me. So I attended a tea party randomly back in January, and I have noticed the guest of that tea party here who ended up recommending me to read this novel. And then later when I learned about this event, it was such a coincidence that I had already read the book, and I'm happy to be here. So today, as Robert mentioned, it's September 16, 2025. So 9/16/25. 9 is 3 squared. So 3 times 3 is 9. 16 is 4 squared. So 4 times 4 is 16. And 25 is 5 squared. 5 times 5 is 25. And not only that, so 3 squared plus 4 squared is equal to 5 squared. So that's the Pythagorean theorem. So if you remember about the right triangle, the hypotenuse squared is one leg squared plus another leg of the right triangle squared. So today is a very coincidence that this event ended up also being on a day that perfectly matches the consecutive numbers called Pythagorean triples. Yes, with that being said, yes, and this Pythagorean theorem is sort of also related to the Fermat's last theorem mentioned in the book, and I'll talk about that during my part. All right.
So we might have to share the microphone, but I think I'm going to pass it over to you, Indra. Or do you
Can
have
you hear me?
if I just use this?
Yeah.
Yes, okay, so apparently this is fine. So thank you so much, Robert, for inviting me to be part of this event today. I'm really thrilled to be here. So I'm just going to begin by offering some background on the author and then talking about the novel, and I hope you'll allow me to also read a few passages. Yōko Ogawa was born in Okayama City in 1962. That's the small city on the inland sea where the Housekeeper and the Professor takes place. And it's halfway between the larger and much more famous cities of Osaka and Hiroshima. And this is why the Hanshin Tigers, the baseball team, can only play nearby the Professor and the Housekeeper twice a year, as we learn in the novel. Now, Ogawa currently lives near the Hanshin Tigers' home stadium, which is Koshien. This is very famous. It's the home of the yearly summer high school baseball tournament, which is a national obsession. And she herself is an avid Tigers fan. The year 1992, when the Housekeeper works for the Professor, was in fact a very memorable one for Tigers fans. And it is entirely possible that Ogawa chose to anchor the novel in this year for just this reason. The Tigers had been in last place or next to last place for the previous 5 years, and they weren't competitive again until 2003. So it seems a very meaningful time. But there's something else about Okayama that's worth mentioning as well, although it doesn't appear directly in the novel. Okayama is also the birthplace of a Japanese religion called Konkokyo. This is a sect of Shinto that was founded in the mid-19th century. Now, Shinto is the oldest religion in Japan. It's a form of animism, which simply refers to a belief that powerful spirits reside in the natural objects and life forms all around us. Ogawa's paternal grandparents, both her grandfather and her grandmother, were leaders of the Konkokyo Church, and her family lived in a cottage on the church grounds. And I say church because usually we use the term shrine for Shinto places of worship, but Konkokyo uses the term kyokai in Japanese, which is a translation of the word church. So even from this terminology, we can sense that this sect of Shinto is quite different from the mainstream religion. I know very little about this religion. In fact, I only found out about it over the weekend while I was reading up on Ogawa. But since the notion of God or kami in Japanese appears in the novel, I thought it was worth mentioning. Konkokyo is a tiny sect with about 350,000 adherents today. That's less than 0.3% of the entire population of Japan. And as a matter of religious principle, it does not deny the legitimacy of other deities or religions. Ogawa herself has been doing a series of radio talks on the Konkokyo website since 2021, and many of them are quite personal and moving. She graduated from Waseda University in Tokyo with a degree in literature in 1984. And since then, she has received numerous literary prizes. She debuted in 1988, and she's won the most prestigious prizes in Japan and outside as well, the Akutagawa Prize and the American Book Award. The Housekeeper and the Professor was her second full-length novel to be translated into English. The translator, Stephen Snyder, has rendered 6 of Ogawa's books into English, which is wonderful because his sustained engagement has allowed him to develop a style that's so well suited to hers. And by the way, I heard that he may be joining us via Zoom. So Stephen, if you're out there, hello. Thank you for this translation, and I hope you'll stick around for the Q&A in case someone wants to ask you about it. The Housekeeper and the Professor was published in Japan in 2003, and it quickly became a bestseller. 490,000 copies sold in hardcover, and then a record-breaking 1 million copies sold in paperback within 2 months of the novel being issued in paperback. This was a record breaker. It was also adapted for the screen in 2006. So this gives you an idea of its reception in Japan. It goes without saying that it's a very unusual novel. On the one hand, it tells a story in a very straightforward manner with a first-person narrator who only departs from everyday language when she talks about math. In the very simplest of terms, she reminisces about a special relationship that developed between herself, her client, and her son. On the other hand, the novel is fundamentally about the love of numbers. It goes without saying that this is not your usual fare in the world of fiction. The Japanese title is Hakase no Aishita Sushiki, which literally means the professor's beloved formulas. If changing the title in English to highlight the relationship between the people instead of the numbers was probably a deft move, because yeah, I suspect that the translator and the editors had a hunch that American readers would be less receptive to a title that sounds to us, well, so dry. But one of the goals of the novel was surely to change that popular view of numbers and mathematics. And Ogawa immediately gets to work on this by dangling a hook on the very first page. If you recall, the sign that inspired the professor to call her son Ruth. It's right there on the very first page, and it even looks like a hook, right? Otherwise, however, the novel eschews most of the typical literary techniques used to keep a reader engaged. It doesn't grab our attention with poetic turns of phrase, vibrant colors and sounds, social discord, or detailed psychological descriptions. And there's only the slightest nod toward romantic intrigue. Much of the story takes place inside a drab two-room cottage that has almost no traffic with the outside world. This is a story that unfolds very gradually, with a bare minimum of dramatic conflict. There is plenty of tension. The professor's memory impairment ensures that nervous tension is baked into the story, but it always gets resolved before something really terrible happens. So compared to most narratives, novelistic or otherwise, this one is very gentle. The gentleness permeates every page of the novel, and it permeates every level, from the pacing of the narrative to the main characters, and even the strangers who come in contact with the professor on the rare occasions when he reluctantly goes out into the world. And it is this gentleness that I think gives the novel its subtle emotional potency. I didn't realize how deeply affecting this was until almost 2/3 of the way into the novel, when suddenly the narrator is forced to change clients. Until that point, I had, without realizing it, been basking in the many comforts the story offers. Small acts of kindness are exchanged between the housekeeper, the professor, and the housekeeper's son on almost every page. And their relationships grow organically from a foundation of mutual sensitivity. Even when the professor leaves the house, Ogawa takes care to shield him from the unkindness of others. The barber is welcoming and unfazed by the professor's strange appearance and demeanor. And at the baseball game, he sits next to a man who delights in his displays of erudition on baseball statistics and even cheers him on. I knew I could count on this gentleness every time I picked up the book. That is, until the housekeeper was suddenly fired for breaking the rules when she stayed overnight to care for the ailing professor. That unexpected jolt made me realize that Ogawa had surreptitiously hooked me. The small kindnesses and talk about numbers shared between the main characters are actually emotionally sustaining, even therapeutic. And I really can't think of any other novel that offers such an experience. Interestingly, this effect seems to stem from Ogawa's own fascination with the world of numbers. A few years after she wrote The Housekeeper and the Professor, Ogawa published a book of conversations she had with some mathematicians. In it, she said, and I quote, "When I was young, I often wrote about the dark side of people, the cruelty and malice they usually keep hidden. But while perusing books on mathematics, I began to make various discoveries, just like the housekeeper, and I came to understand in a visceral way that numbers are eternal. And when I began to write about people who live in this vast world of numbers, it felt as though the malice and cruelty people are born with just vanished into thin air," unquote. Now, unlike language, numbers don't change. The meanings of words change all the time and are open to multiple interpretations. And in that sense, even for those of us who love language and all of the magical things it can do, we can't help but acknowledge that it often contributes to the messiness of our world, rather than just capturing it or bringing it to order. The idea that numbers are eternal, that they existed before humankind and presumably will continue to exist just as they are long after we are all gone, is, I think, akin to a religious impulse, a desire for something perfect in itself that transcends the messiness and instability of our world and the pain and anguish that come with it. What the professor wanted was peace and quiet, and I quote again, internal calm, uninterrupted by the outside world. And if I can read to you from this passage a little bit further. When he had solved a contest problem from one of his journals and was making a clean copy to put in the mail, you could often hear him murmur, "How peaceful." He seemed to be perfectly calm in these moments, as though everything were in its rightful place, with nothing left to add or subtract. Peaceful was to him the highest compliment. When he was in a good mood, he would sit at the kitchen table and watch me making dinner. And if I were making dumplings, he would look on with something approaching wonder. I would take a dumpling skin in the palm of my hand, spoon a bit of filling, and then pinch up the edges before setting it on the platter. A simple process, but he was completely absorbed by it, watching me until the last dumpling had been stuffed. I have to admit that the scene struck me as so funny that I could hardly keep from laughing. When I was done at last and the dumplings were neatly arranged on the plate, he would fold his hands on the table and nod solemnly. How peaceful. Here, Ogawa seamlessly weaves together the eternal and the quotidian, the deep satisfaction of solving a mathematical problem and that of watching a skilled hand make a set of dumplings. Later, when things go awry and the narrator has to work for a different client, she recalls, and I quote, "As I mopped the office floor, my mind churning with worries about Root, I realized how much I needed this eternal truth that the professor had described. I needed the sense that this invisible world was somehow propping up the visible one, that this one true line extended infinitely without width or area, confidently piercing through the shadows. Somehow this line would help me find peace," unquote. Now, at first I thought that this novel could be described as therapeutic without being cathartic. All three of the main characters shoulder some burdens from the past. The professor's memory impairment, obviously, as well as the absence of a father, an emotional void shared by both the housekeeper and her son. And so it seemed that their story was mainly therapeutic because it shows each of them getting something they need. The professor receives care, affection, and deep admiration from the housekeeper and her son, and they in turn receive his affection and gift for teaching about numbers. But now that I've read it 3 times, both in English and Japanese, I've come to a different view. So much is hidden beneath the surface that this novel truly bears another look. What finally hit me upon the 3rd reading was what it means to love someone who can't remember you and to cherish that relationship, to hold it dear. Japan is on the cutting edge of aging societies, having grappled with this problem since the 1990s. And just a few days ago, the Japanese government announced that it had set a record high of nearly 100,000 people aged 100 or older, a record that has continued to break every year for more than half a century. The problem of memory loss among the elderly means that there are more and more children whose parents no longer recognize who they are. And here in the US as well, this experience has become increasingly common. Ogawa barely hints at the pain this causes in the housekeeper and the professor, but she doesn't need to do any more than that for her readers to be affected. The only time the narrator expresses anger and frustration is when the professor walks off on his own, pushing her aside after his dental procedure. Excuse me. And let me read to you again. He's just emerged from the room. "Are you all right? You must be tired," I said. I stood up and held out my hand to him, but he brushed me aside and walked away without a look. I called after him, but it was as if he hadn't heard me. He shuffled out of the office slippers, pushed on his shoes, and walked out the door. I paid the bill as quickly as I could and chased after him down the street. He was reaching a busy intersection when I finally caught up with him. He seemed to know the way home, but he had charged out into the street, oblivious to the traffic and the signals. I was surprised to see how quickly he could walk. "Wait!" I called out to slow him down, but this only succeeded in drawing wary looks from people nearby. The heat and glare of the summer sun were dizzying. I was starting to get angry. He had no reason to be so rude to me. It was hardly my fault that it had been so painful, and it would have been far worse had we ignored it. Even Root was braver than this at the dentist. Of course, that was it. I should have brought Root along. The professor would have felt compelled to behave more like an adult with a child present. And to treat me like this after I kept my promise and waited for him the whole time. I knew it was cruel, but I had half a mind to let him go off on his own. unquote. Now, just after this rare flash of anger, the housekeeper realizes that the professor didn't recognize her and that his 80-minute internal memory clock has broken. And the anger quickly passes. But it's a scene that many readers would viscerally recognize as something that they've either experienced themselves, seen, or feared. And it is what gives the final chapter such poignancy. When we learn that the housekeeper and Root continued to visit the professor at the long-term care facility until his death some 12 years later. So if I can close where I started, which is with baseball, I'd like to propose one further question for discussion afterwards, which is, what for you was the effect of the novel's final paragraph? And I will just read it to refresh your memory. So the sky is dark. The spectators and the scoreboard are in shadow. Enatsu stands alone on the mound under the stadium lights. The windup, the pitch. Beneath the visor of his cap, his eyes follow the ball, willing it over the plate and into the catcher's mitt. It is the fastest one he has ever thrown, and I can just see the number of the back of his pinstripe uniform, the perfect number, 28. So I know that our other panelists have a lot to talk about, so I'll end my remarks here, and I look forward to discussion afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you, Indra. Yeah, a lot to talk about there, but I will ask Rosaley to intervene.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. Thank you so much for coming tonight. So coming into this novel, I had bought it in Japanese when I was taking a vacation in Japan because I'd heard so much about it, and yet I still had no idea what it was about, except for the fact that it was math and a professor. But I had read a few other of Ogawa's works, one of which is The Memory Police, which has been translated into English, and by Stephen Snyder as well. And the other was something that I read for my comprehensive exams called, I think literally it'd be like the pregnancy calendar, but it's about a pair of siblings who, one of them is pregnant and can't eat anything until she starts wanting to eat everything. And her sister tries, and the husband try really, really hard to feed her and satisfy her. And there's very sinister qualities to both of these other works by Ogawa I had read. So when I was reading this novel, I'm not gonna lie to you, I was waiting for the other shoe to drop the entire time. I was like, if she leaves to get her son, is he going to, suffer a fall when they go to the baseball game? Is he going to get beamed by a baseball? And if that's the case, would it fix his memory? And so while I was reading, I was coming up with all of these different scenarios in which, something really, really drastic would happen. And the only drastic thing that really ended up happening was her getting fired, and that gets resolved. So I reached the end of the book and had no idea what to do with myself. So on the second read, I, of course, knowing the story, went in with a completely different mindset. And one of the things that stood out to me was the domestic space of the professor's home. Most of the novel takes place in it, and we encounter it very early on. It's this cottage with a red roof, separate entryway from the main house. It's not well kept at all. She calls it shabby at one point. It's a hastily built bungalow. When she goes in, there's just cheap furniture and shoddy old appliances, and it's pretty dirty. And obviously her job is to clean the house, take care of the professor, but she does this sort of homemaking work professionally, and has done it since she was a child because she had to take care of her mother, but she only does it now from the hours of 11 to 7, Monday to Friday. And as her relationship with the professor develops, and as Ruth's relationship with the professor develops, I found it kind of funny that this very harmonious family-like setting only existed between the hours of 11 to 7 p.m. And maybe we can talk about that and the commodification of labor. But the more I read, the more I realized how much like the everyday and domesticity permeate every aspect of this novel, from the cookie tin with the baseball cards and the dissertation in it, to the empty space at the kitchen table when Root goes to get candles. I think that absence is much more deeply felt. And even Root's homework. There's the 2 handkerchiefs and 2 pairs of socks. If you buy 5 pairs of socks and 2 handkerchiefs, it's 710 yen. How much does each item cost? Like, the everyday permeates even a simple math problem. And I noticed all of that the second time around because I had noticed the domesticity, and also because so I study food, depictions of food and eating in Japanese literature. So of course, I was paying very close attention to all of the food that appears, and I could just read you the list of it. I don't know if that would be interesting or not. It's interesting to me. But what occurred to me is that first, there's no repeats. There's, a couple of soups, but the soups have different ingredients. And other than that, she cooks a lot of Western food, Western style food. I went back through the Japanese wondering if I had missed something, and no, she really is cooking meatloaf and mashed potatoes and roast beef and salad with olive oil dressing, green pea potage, so on and so bread. And I thought that was interesting because home cooking in Japan is, of course, very varied today, but the dishes that people generally associate with home cooking tend to be simmered things, grilled fish, tamagoyaki, like sweet omelets, rice, miso soup, that kind of stuff. And of course, curry, which is curry rice in Japan, is a very common staple in the home because it's easy, it's fast. But the only time they eat curry is when they go out for it. So there's a lot of strange reversals. And I don't have a whole lot more to say about the food, but I did want to point out one that if we've talked about the carrots, and the betrayal that she does, and it still bothers me. I still wonder what she did with the hamburger that had the carrot in it, because he sent her home before she could cook them, and so it continues to bother me to this day what happened to the carrots. But I think there is this one passage on page 135 of the housekeeper cooking, and it's similar to the dumpling scene, but yeah. The professor has been watching her cook, and he walks away, and she says, "I looked at the food I had just finished preparing, and then at my hands. Sauteed pork garnished with lemon, a salad, and a soft yellow omelet. I studied the dishes one by one. They were all perfectly ordinary, but they looked delicious. Satisfying food at the end of a long day. I looked at my palms again, suddenly filled with an absurd sense of satisfaction, as though I had just solved Fermat's last theorem." I lost track of where I wanted to go with that. But I do think that amidst all of the sort of triumphs of math, baseball, and everything else, the domesticity in this novel is a triumph of its own. And there's something really beautiful about a meal that's well cooked.
Well, that last quote about Fermat's theorem, I think, prepares the way for Lernik. So, Lernik.
All right. So as already mentioned, the language of numbers is certainly the language that the professor is comfortable with talking to the world outside. to the housekeeper, to strangers, to some people who he only has the 80-minute memory, so everything is new for him, but math is always constant there. So that's, to me, that was the language that he felt comfortable with communicating with others, finding the common numbers, for instance, the seat number that he and Ruth was sharing, or the birth date versus the number on the watch, for instance, that the housekeeper and the professor was sharing. So the professor, which is common among mathematicians, we're really comfortable in our comfort zone, we're comfortable in our own bubble, and getting to the world outside, it sometimes requires extra effort. Me being here, having zero expertise in literature, is certainly something that matches really well with the theme of this book, that strangers are coming together using the language of math. So that's something that certainly resonates with me. And then the love of math that the professor has certainly mentioned by the Robert is something that I can see that he also uses that to gift what he has to other people, the teaching that he has. Certainly the housekeeper at the very beginning of the book mentions that she doesn't like math, or she has always struggled with math. And the way that the professor is gently introducing her to math is something that basically gives that love of math to the other person. Coming from being really passionate about teaching myself, that was certainly something that I would keep following to see if the housekeeper is really getting into that love of math that the professor is trying to share or not. So I was looking forward to reading further and seeing how much she gets into it when she goes to the library, when she just opens the book knowing nothing about the Fermat's last theorem, but deciding to read about it. That was certainly something that I felt really, I love that part of the book. There's the world of strangers coming together, I would say, is in the Euler's identity. So the formula that says e to the I pi plus 1 equal to 0, that shows up a lot. It's on the cover of the book as well. And when Robert mentioned to me, why do you think this formula, and why do you think, what was the particular choice of this? Well, I'm not the author, so I don't know it, but I'll interpret it my own way. The E is a number that is very there are tons of applications on E. It represents exponential growth. So whenever you hear that something is growing exponentially, it's that E is 2.7-ish, so it's a number. And then I is the imaginary number. Pi is also the circle constant. So if you divide the circumference of a circle by diameter, you get pi. And then 1 and 0 are also numbers. So we have numbers on the left-hand side, numbers on the right-hand side. At some point, it looks very simple. It's just an equation that is basically numbers on the left and number on the right. To me, one thing that's certainly important in this particular math equation is that E is very important and I is very important in math, pi is very important in math. It doesn't seem that they are related to each other, but they are all together in one formula and one equation. To me, it was the three characters of the book. So I would say root was E because that's the exponential growth. He becomes a math teacher at the end. That was lovely. I love that part. So I would say that exponential growth, that growing, the little child growing and getting into that math, that's something that will resonate with that. I would say pi is certainly the professor. The reason is pi is a constant. The number part, the math part of the professor stays constant. And other than that, the e to the I pi is related to sines and cosines in trigonometry. So if you remember sine and cosine functions, they are periodic functions. And the memory of this professor was just every 80 minutes, the memory was being renewed. And to me, that was a periodic function, basically. But at the same time, pi is a constant and it stays the same. So the professor, the math side of the professor doesn't get lost in this cyclical world. And I would just say since it's left out, it'll be the housekeeper. I don't know why I couldn't find a good analogy for that. It's an imaginary number. Maybe it's wondrous. Maybe it's the housekeeper trying to get into the wonders of math and the interest that she has in that particular equation. But certainly, this equation is an unexpected unity of a lot of important math concepts. That's definitely in the math side that I can say for sure. And it has billions of applications, of course, that I can mention. But all of them coming together in one equation with the equal sign and the balance there, to me, it's like all the strangers in the book coming together as one unified family. I also remember when the sister-in-law got mad at the housekeeper in the route visiting him. That was the equation that the professor wrote on the table on the piece of paper. And the sister-in-law, once she saw that equation, I think her anger was gone. So probably there was she already knew about the formula, or there was something behind that, I'm not sure. But certainly to me, it was that these are family. Like, you don't want to mess with the family. You want that unity and balance to stay there. That was something that I thought of it. The other mentions of math in the book, also, I won't say they are random at all. So Taniyama-Shimura conjecture was mentioned a couple of times in the textbook. Taniyama and Shimura, they are Japanese mathematicians, and they had a conjecture back in 1950s. Conjecture is a statement in math that it's believed to be true, but it's not proven yet. So they conjectured it back in 1950s. And the conjecture itself is also connecting two different worlds of math, the elliptic curves and modular forms, and they're trying to find a connection between these two different worlds. So to me, again, this particular choice of the conjecture, not only the mathematicians being Japanese, of course, and the baseball example, for instance, also reminded me that this particular choice of the conjecture is not also random. It was probably pretty popular back then when the author was writing, because this Taniyama-Shimura conjecture was fully proven in 2001. So I think that that choice was probably a particular choice. And the Taniyama-Shimura conjecture, parts of it, a special part of it is needed for the proof of the Fermat's last theorem. So as I mentioned in the beginning, the Pythagorean theorem is when you have x squared plus y squared is equal to z squared. But if you change that 2 to a 3, then you cannot find the numbers like 3 squared plus 4 squared is equal to 5 squared, the 9, 16, and 25 that we have today. If you change that to x to the power of n plus y to the power of n equals z to the power of n, you cannot find x, y, and z that will satisfy that equation for n greater than or equal to 3. So the Taniyama-Shimura conjecture is needed for the proof of this Fermat's last theorem. The Fermat's last theorem was proven first in 1994. There was a little bit of error in the proof that after collaboration with Professor Richard Taylor, who happens to be a professor in the math department at Stanford here, the proof was corrected and completed in 1995. And then the Taniyama-Shimura conjecture, as I mentioned, it's called conjecture because it wasn't proven yet, but it was proved in 1999 by 4 mathematicians, and it was fully proved in 2001. Later, one version of it was 1999, then 2001, by 4 mathematicians, and Professor Brian Conrad, also in the Stanford math department, was one of the mathematicians who proved this theorem. So Professor Brian Conrad and Professor Richard Taylor, they are 2 faculty in our department here that were directly involved with the Taniyama-Shimura conjecture, which once it was proved later, it's called modularity theorem. So when something is proven, then the name changes to being considered a theorem. And also the Fermat's last theorem was proven because it needed the Taniyama-Shimura conjecture to be proven. So I thought I will also mention these fun facts of our faculty right here being involved with this theorem. So when I was reading the book, I would keep taking screenshots of pictures of the pages and sending to this faculty and saying, oh, I'm reading a novel that directly talks about the theorems that you have worked with and you've proved. So that was also interesting to me. And it took 350 years for Fermat's last theorem to be proven. That's how much patience one needs when it comes to math. And that was one of the topics of the book as well to me, that you need to be patient when it comes to falling in love with math, when it comes to just trying to sit there with a pen and pencil and then stare at something for long hours. It really requires patience. When Robert was talking about the love of math, that also, I remembered Professor Maria Mirzakhani. She was the first field medalist, a woman field medalist, also at Stanford Math Department here. She has a really nice quote saying that math shows its beauty to whoever is patient, that taking 350 years to prove something, that really requires a patient. Andrew Wiles, by the way, I forgot to mention the main person behind proving Fermat's last theorem. Andrew Wiles, who was also the PhD advisor of Professor Brian Conrad, is the main person who proved the Fermat's last theorem. He worked on it for 7 years. So he was working on this particular theorem for 7 years, but in general, so many mathematicians tried to tackle this for 350 years. And that's something that I also wanted to mention about.
Thank you, thank you. Some of us take 10 years to write a book too. So patience. So there are a lot of elements in play. I read the novel twice, and then the other day I couldn't remember exactly how it begins. So that's another thing about works of literature, both novels and poems. They don't really begin exactly where they start. And so I went back and I was really quite surprised. And you mentioned this, Indra, that the first paragraph and the first page, the novel doesn't really begin until page 4 in our edition. And I think it's from a narrative strategy, it's very interesting that it begins in medias res with all this mathematics, where it doesn't begin with her arriving at the apartment, and we called him the professor, and then there's the square root and of all the countless things, and then idea of numbers, and he asks her on page 3, what is the square root of -1? And she thinks about it, hesitantly says, there is no such number. And he says, well, there is. And she says, where is it? And he points, to his chest and says, it's here. And it's the most discrete sort of number, so it never comes out where it can be seen, but it's here. And so this already sets out the Platonism, which I mentioned, where he believes in a kind of world of numbers, which is independent and separate from the world of reality, embodied reality. And that I think the peace that he yearns for and sometimes experiences comes from connecting with a world that is beyond the contingencies of the agitation of reality. And therefore, I think also what you were saying about the baseball motif, it's baseball is all about numbers. Anyone who is a baseball fan, that you have to get batting averages, ERAs, and how many times, and yet when he's taken out of this is a very, I think, Rosaley, your domestic is a very claustrophiliac kind of environment where there's this love of enclosure. And when he's taken out of that, especially the baseball game, it's really quite traumatic. But that's numbers in real time taking place with a crush of people in the audience, and they're all going crazy with their passions for the game rather than the passion for numbers. And you can imagine a mathematician who is used to the ideal, Platonic ideal of this peaceful realm of numbers is in the midst of having to put numbers together in real time about what are the actual probabilities that
ball's going to hit me.
The ball's going to hit you, or that so he's going to pitch a perfect game. And he said at a certain point, he says there's 1 in 100 and something. Anyway, he's making all these calculations in real time. It's kind of driving him crazy. So this is anything but the peace and serenity. But that's where numbers enter the real world, no? So there's that thing. I just wanted to mention and ask for discussion about amical numbers, because amical numbers are brought up very early on when he asks her for the nth time, what is your birthday? And she says February 2nd. And so it's okay, 2:20, and then he takes off his watch. This is a narrative device that not very convincing, but he happens to have the number 284 inscribed underneath his watch because he won a prize. It was given to him. But in any case, the point is that there's a special relationship between the numbers 220 and 224, where, I mean, maybe Lernik can reconstruct that relation. I can read it, but I'm not going to. The idea is that whatever that relation is amicality. And I think it stands for the relationship between the two of them, where it's a kind of love which is not romantic, passionate love and death, but it's something about a kind of friendship love, which is also very special. And it's the most original declaration of love I've ever read in literature, to say that this amicable love, these amicable numbers are kind of expressing something where it's the only language that he knows in order to say that he's fond of. He's not in love. He's not in love with the housekeeper. He's fond of. He has an affection for. So, therefore, I would like to maybe get you, Indra, first to talk about how, a little bit more about peacefulness and how that enters into the soul. And then we can go from there into this domestic space, which is a very safe, enclosed space. But there's 3 excursions. There's the barber. All of them are kind of slightly traumatic. There's a barber, there's a baseball game, and then the cake, the birthday party. And so.
And then there's a dentist. The dentist.
The dentist, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, the dentist of yeah.
Yeah, the way I experienced peace from this novel was it sort of snuck up on me, I think. And I really appreciated that. I think when we first met to talk about this novel, not everybody loves it.
No.
And some people, I think, don't have the same reaction. And we were talking about that. And, I said, well, it's not the kind of novel that hits you over the head. It doesn't manipulate your emotions. It's not out there trying to grab you and pull you, but it's not really immersive in that sense. It's very gentle.
It's gentle.
And then that sort of, it models that gentleness. I think that's not a very literary term, but I feel like the way that it shows the gentleness between the characters and then the gentle pace of the narrative itself, it makes me feel more gentle.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, I know this is going to sound even more goofy, but when my son was little, and he was in preschool, his preschool, they had terrariums in the classroom, and the kids were often encouraged to bring in snails, and he loved doing that. So he'd get snails from the garden when it had been raining or something, bring them in, and the kids would put the snail on their hand, and the snails would slowly come out, and they would just sort of, leave their trail. They're very slow and gentle. And the teacher said, snails are so wonderful because they teach kids how to be gentle.
Yeah.
And I thought, wow, I didn't know that, but it's really true. And it sort of makes me feel like this is a snail of a novel. It sort of teaches gentleness in a way. Yeah.
It's true. In fact, one of our big donors said that she was sorry it came to an end because it's a kind of world that you want to continue to inhabit. Because that's what books are. They're worlds that one enters into, and sometimes you don't want them, to come to an end. And the idea that the popularity of the book and the way it's sold, in Japan, also in the United States, the kind of interest there's a sense that so much of the culture is about violence, agitation, and everything is like antithesis of gentleness, and that there's some way in which this book really
I can just add a little bit to that. Engagement is it's the modus operandi of all social media.
Yes.
Right? It's to force you to engage. And what gets people to engage the most? It's the negative emotions.
Mhm.
It's anger, outrage. It's not, oh, isn't that nice?
Right.
And so just the degree to which our world has become dominated with these kind of stories and media interfaces that are forcing us to engage, it's such a relief after living with that every day, to read something like this that's not doing that. You know,
I know publishers who say if something doesn't happen on the first page, I don't read the beyond.
Yeah.
So, and what has to happen on the either a murder or a kind of sex scene or something that is, anything but.
So it ties back to what Lernik was saying about patience. Patience is not just important in math, right? And it's something that we have less and less of. So this also could be teaching us patience when we get, it does bear a second and third read, I guarantee. As someone who read it the first time and I was like, oh, I don't know what just happened, sort of like Rosaley, the second time and then third time, I got more and more into it. And, that's a form of patience too. Yeah.
So, can I ask, I'll make a confession that the numbers, I make the best effort. And after the second reading, I think well, at a certain point, I frankly get really bored with numbers. I'm much more at home in conceptual abstractions of philosophy and things, but if I have to follow the logic of numbers and I can understand that there's a certain enchantment, but I can't, I'm immune to the love of it. You must deal with students all the time who have a certain resistance to that or not, or are they already pre-selected that they're in love with mathematics when they take your course? Because I don't know what it would take to convert me to a love of mathematics.
Yeah, well, I believe that the very first experience that one has with any subject, I think that really affects how we think about that subject. So it doesn't really matter whatever area one comes from, there's always a story behind it that what got you interested in that particular subject, whether it be math or some other area. There are students, I do teach wide range of classes in the math department, and Math 18 being the very first foundational course that I created it a few years ago. So that's called Foundation for Calculus. That the main purpose of creating that course was to fill in the gaps that students have before taking an actual calculus class. And I would say almost all the students there are the students who don't like math or who did not have good experience with math. And there is a very common saying that I'm not comfortable with, that they would say, I'm not a math person. And then I would tell my students, there's no such a thing. You can like something or like something more than something else. But saying that I'm not a math person and putting that belief in you that this is not something that I like, I think it ties back to the experience that the students first had with the math class or the opportunities that they were given, how well motivated they were in order to study that subject. It's not supposed to be an easy subject. I always tell my students on the day one that if you want to become good at any sports, you have to go to the gym and you have to work out, and it's painful. And if you want to get better in math, it's not supposed to be easy, and you have to just practice and know how to learn it. It's a different language, certainly, so it requires a different approach to it. So that's something that I always tell my students: set aside your opinion about whether you're a math person or not, and then try to revisit that throughout this course. And I would say at the end of the class, there are students who would mention that, oh, you completely changed my idea about math, and that's certainly something that is very fulfilling, and that's why I love teaching. But there are also people at the end that would say, oh, I really now like it because I understand, but it's not something that I would go and pursue and get a degree in it, which is understandable. I mean, there are tons of majors out there, and not anyone can major in whatever they're really interested in. But the love of math, a lot of students would tell me, oh, I didn't have a good teacher, I didn't have a good experience, or I didn't know how to study. It was strange to me, and I didn't see the motivation behind it. The main math presented in the book comes from number theory. That's certainly not even my area. My area is partial differential equations and probability, so I'm in a PD and probability background. So number theory is a very specific, particular area of math that's being presented here. But if, again, it's not patterns within the math world or all the concepts that are being introduced, if that is not something interesting, I would still say there are tons of areas of math out there that are interesting, and we can provide like motivation behind that.
Yeah, so that's very interesting because one thing I haven't figured out for myself is whether the kind of love of math that the book depicts is whether you love math not just because the numbers cohere or there are all these hidden relations and harmonies and so forth, but that if you live intensely and long enough with numbers, that it's a portal to a higher reality of as you were saying, kind of eternity, timelessness, the unchanging world, as opposed. So therefore, the typically Platonic ideal realm. But we'll leave that question open for the moment. But so, Rosaley, a question: the domestic sphere and the role that the cooking that she plays as as a cook, and the little ways she smuggles in those carrots. For someone who doesn't like carrots any more than the professor, it's really kind of annoying that she does that. But nevertheless, we were talking about this before we came, that is she trying to establish some kind of relation with him where he's giving her the enchantments of mathematics and she is providing in return
A love of carrots?
I don't know. He doesn't like food. He's not a gourmet, so he doesn't enjoy the eating, but he's biological, so he knows that she's nourishing him at some fundamental level. And it almost doesn't matter what she cooks for him, no?
Yeah, I definitely think like the professor from the very beginning doesn't care what he eats as long as it's not carrots, which is a very specific dislike as a fellow carrot hater. But what I found interesting is that she almost, by sneaking carrots into his food, she's almost trying to mother him, like responsible mother kind of way, where it's like, you're gonna learn to like it because they're good for you. But also the professor's eating habits change over the course of the novel when Root comes into play, right? Like the first few meals, they don't share, or if she eats at the table with him, she notes how messily he's eating. There's like drops of soup everywhere, sauces, and he chews with his mouth open. But as soon as Root comes into the equation, he starts to perform the perfect, like neat, proper table manners for him. Almost, and I wondered reading this how often Root eats at home with his mother. And specifically, like he prescribes a certain schedule for Root, which as if I was a 9-10-year-old, I would have been very upset by. Where it's like he says, children should be in bed by 8, so you have to have dinner before 7. So you have to eat here. But yeah, the food itself becomes a lot more varied, like celebratory. And he also takes an interest in her cooking once Root gets involved. Yeah.
Great. And so we're going to turn it over now to the Q&A, but I just one last remark about mathematics and youth, because I was struck by the professor's love of Root, but then when they're in the playground and a little girl gets hurt or something, he goes and rushes to, he has a particular attachment to the young. And I guess I don't want to put you under this pressure, but there is a thing called fluid intelligence. And this is the ability to reason and think abstractly and solve novel mathematical problems without relying on prior knowledge, and it peaks during late adolescence and early adulthood and then begins to decline. This ability is critical for creating new strategies for complex, unfamiliar math problems. And I know that oftentimes mathematical geniuses, or many of the breakthroughs or brilliant discoveries are made by the very young. Does the professor's kind of love of the young have this kind of Platonic idea that you reproduce, that you want to reproduce the, the higher truths through some process of transmission, and that therefore Root and any other young person represents this potential for the kind of reproduction of mathematical wisdom? I did not realize that I made a joke. How about we open it up? I know that there are some people online. I get a signal from the back of the room, but those of you in person get priority first. And yes.
I've got 3 questions. We'll start with one, then we'll go to some audience questions.
You're going to read one?
I'm going to read one of the questions, and would you rather go to the other ones first? Benjamin K. Harrington wrote, and this one's for Lernik. Isn't Euler's formula, when depicted graphically in a third space, a helix? It feels like there could be some relevance in that shape to both the memory loop of the professor and the way the plot advances, and as well how the professor, housekeeper, and Root, and the sister-in-law have to confront the professor's condition. Maybe.
Well, I'll comment on the math part of it. So yes, e to the I pi is cosine pi plus I times sine pi. And if we graph it on the coordinate system, it'll end up being the circle that I was talking about, and the circular behavior of also sines and cosines being periodic. But the last part of the connecting it, can you read that again?
Okay.
Or I'll have others comment.
It feels like there could be some relevance in that shape to both the memory loop of the professor and the way the plot advances, and as well how the housekeeper and Root have to confront the professor's condition. And the sister-in-law, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, staring at that formula for long, I was also thinking that certainly the pi part and the periodic part of it is representing the professor's memory being refreshed every 80 minutes. So there's this periodic function going on. And the whole equation altogether, as I already mentioned, to me, it's just the unity of different unrelated strange math concepts, same thing as the characters in the book coming all together in one single equation.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was struck by the comment about, because I have the same feeling reading this book, at towards the end, feeling very, very, because of the love of the relationships in this book that were very understated. So, and I had a question about at the end, when she's looking through the baseball cards and she goes through underneath, she finds this group, this something that had N on it. And I thought that was the sister-in-law. And I had looked at that as a possible love affair that the professor had hidden in the bottom and that nobody knew about it. And that's why, one of the reasons why the sister-in-law was very jealous of the housekeeper the night she stayed overnight. And then she fired her because she felt that the professor was getting very close. I don't know if I'm the only one in this room that thought that, but I think the love, there is something to do with hidden love and quiet emotion.
We have been in the same accident together.
Actually,
Oh, could you comment on that? What did she say?
They might have been in the same car accident together because she's walking with Kate and she never explains why that is. And so I think there was this love and this connection. She doesn't explain it, but
But we do know that he will never forget her. So she is the one exception to his memory loss. Yes.
Oh, I have, right, yeah, so, sorry. Yeah, I think you're right. I think that is, certainly it's hinted at that this is a possibility. Although it's also interesting that it's never completely confirmed. It's sort of left out there for us to wonder about. Which is why I meant, I said it only sort of slightly nods at romantic intrigue, but doesn't ever confirm it and doesn't give us more to go on. Let's say conjecture, yeah. But it's still a mystery. It's an interesting. I guess it leaves us more also intrigued by the meaning of that Euler's identity, the equation that he writes down and puts at the table, and she reads it and she totally changes her tune. What did she read in that? That's like. I'm still pondering that. What was it that she saw there that calmed her down, right?
Well,
that's
exactly, because it clearly means something to the two of them that we're not privy to. The readers are not privy, neither is the housekeeper privy. It also, there's such an impulse to always read for the romantic connection and the erotic. We are so in the West, for certain, we're so erotocentric that we're looking for the passionate love affair as the secret ingredient. And yet, I think the brilliance of the novel is that it displaces Eros into the realm of mathematics, and that what you want to do is develop a passion for numbers. And it's the sister-in-law and the professor relate through numbers. Otherwise, that equation that he writes down would not have had that kind of effect, because they speak through these numbers. No. Yes, please. Hold on.
To this novel, and that is one about self-identity. And there's internal identity that's formed from our internal cues and external identity. And that there was a turning point in the book at the end. But in my reading of it, the internal identity came from the fact that he had all these sticky notes on him all the time. In order to ground himself, to identify himself, and nothing was coming from the outside until the end, when Root and his mother bought that very special baseball card for him. And at the end of the book, he was wearing it around his neck. And that became so important to him. And that was part of his external identity that was given to him in the act of love. And I was wondering if the panel can admit that perhaps that there's another theme besides one of mathematics.
That's such a beautiful way of putting that, I think. Thinking of the baseball card that he wears around his neck as part of the thing, the identity that he receives from the outside world and from a gift of affection. It's just a beautiful way of putting it. So thank you for that. Yeah.
And baseball it's a sport that's all about the history of itself. And so everything that happens in a particular game is adding a little bit to this huge history of averages and numbers and players. And it's so brilliant the way a professor who has only 80 minutes of memory is also brought into the orbit of a game that it's all about the memory of itself over the decades and so forth. Yeah. So Cynthia, one more question from our online audience. We have a lot of people out there following us.
People out here. So now this is from Yoshiko Matsumoto, and she has a question for Indra. She said, "Itsukushimi is a Japanese word that."
Can you speak up a little?
Itsukushimi is in Japanese is the word that comes to my mind in terms of love that is being expressed in this story. I would love to hear what Indra thinks about that.
So hi, Yoshiko. Yoshiko is my colleague in the department. She's a wonderful professor of Japanese linguistics here at Stanford. And so Itsukushimi, that's a hard, that's hard to translate, which is I think why she provided the Japanese term. It's to hold something or someone dear, which is it's similar to love, but it doesn't have the baggage of the
Being
concept.
fond of.
Yeah, to be fond of, but more than just liking, it's to really hold something dear and precious. And
Cherish,
it has
to
a
cherish.
to cherish. That's good. Yeah, it has a tenderness to it, but it doesn't necessarily involve eros. Yeah.
And you were mentioning before about the title of the book in Japanese has the word love in it,
It does, yeah.
and that it's a very powerful word.
Yeah, so the title of this book in Japanese I mentioned when I was talking is Hakase no Aishita Suzuki, and the word love in Japanese is ai. And that word, it came to mean love in the same sense as the Western sense in the late 19th century. It was used as a translation for the term. And so it carries a lot of weight in Japanese because it has that special feel to it. It's not, it's like people don't say, I love you, aishiteru, very casually. Where in English we say, I love this book, you know, I love that tea, I love you, right? It's all the same word. You don't use I that way. And so it sticks out, it's very heavy, and it can be a little bit awkward. So I think that may be one of the reasons why it was effective in Japanese in a way. It has this almost poetic sense to it that's sort of out of this worldly kind of feeling. But Itsukushimi is it's a gentle tenderness. It's a kind of tenderness towards people. So Yoshiko, thank you so much for that. I think that is a great word for describing the relationships here.
Yeah. So yes, please. Wait for the mic, it's coming.
And this is a question for Rosaley. I'm saying your name right. You mentioned that the food is never repeated. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit, what does that say about their relationship or the domestics, or any kind of, if you could expand on maybe why that happened, what it might mean for us.
Initially, I thought about it as this sense of she's like showing off her skills, because clearly the professor doesn't care what he eats. He has no favorites. He has one non-favorite. But the further along I read this, the second time around when I wasn't waiting for something drastic to happen, the more I realized that this like incredible variety of food, like this is food that generally takes a fair amount of time to prepare. Like frying the gyoza, letting the omelet batter or the eggs rest and stuff. Grating carrots by hand is a real task. All of these things end up taking quite a fair amount of time to prepare, and I feel like in that case she's not only fulfilling the role of like she's doing her duty, keeping the place clean, feeding him something vaguely nutritious every day from the hours of 11 to 7 and over the weekends in a frozen meal, but instead she's trying to show him a diversity of experiences in a very like within the comfortable domestic sphere. Yeah, that's my interpretation.
Yeah, okay.
Well, I wanted to add to your comments about the baseball game, because I had a very different take on it, that the experience of being at a baseball game is incredibly different than knowing about all the numbers and the statistics and the ERAs and all that stuff. The sights and the sounds and the smells and seeing what's going on in this wonderful outdoor space is a very visceral experience. And I thought, so it's actually a question, but my reaction to that part of the novel was to point that contrast out. yes, we've been learning about the mathematics and the number theory and all of that. And that's what baseball was for the professor until he was taken out to an actual game. And that was a completely different experience. The beautiful woman who's selling the, I mean, you know, it goes on and on and on and on. And anyway, that's what struck me about that part of the novel. I just don't know if anybody else had that reaction.
Well, you know, my sense is that that baseball game is not typical, certainly not in America, where you have that absolute intensity of passion, that kid who is just, you know, completely ecstatic and he has that player and he's fixated and there's this high octane intensity. But, you know, in my experience of the difference between American football and American baseball is that you go to a baseball game and it's very gentle. It's that world of calm, and you can hear it just in it's kind of like a little you know, it's chirping and it's almost like bird noises among the public. It's not that guttural thing that you get at football games, which coming from a darker, more violent place. And the action happens every now and then. You have something that happens, but mostly you go to a baseball game and it's very calming because not much happens. And therefore, for me, it's the most satisfying sport to listen to on the radio because there's such little going on. It's filled with these great commentaries about numbers, right? You get all the statistics and you get you know, who hit this and the history of the game. So you know, when I want to relax, I'll put on a baseball game. If I want to get my blood pressure up, I watch a football game. So I'm not sure that particular game that they went to, even though it was probably a playoff game, so it was really I think something.
No, it's way earlier. It's not. It's like in July.
Yeah,
I remember. This is like
if you want to follow up.
Well, I would just say there are levels. You start off with just numbers. That's one abstraction of a baseball game. Or you listen to it on the radio, that gives you a little bit more. Maybe you watch it on television, that gives you a little bit more. But actually being there at the game is a whole bigger experience. Certainly in my experience, but I think that's why a lot of people go to, you know, people go see 30,000 people go see the Giants, you know, who are terrible.
But you go see what they're doing during those games. They're having picnics, they're with their family, they're talking with the others, and every now and then you hear the crack of the bat, and everyone kind of pays attention for a moment. Whereas at a football game, it's a roar that's constant. And a soccer game is the same thing. It's the constant roars and the chants of the thing. They're, you know, one is a kind of rapture, kind of you're possessed. And baseball, I think, is a release from that kind of intensity. But this is my own personal take on baseball. Maybe Rosaley has a different.
I will, as someone who is very bad at watching sports, I also think football has a lot of downtime personally. They're not doing anything when I look at the screen. When it's a Super Bowl, I'm just like, they're still talking. Why is the timer still going also? But I also feel like baseball in Japan feels like a slightly different
I'm sure
game. Well, it's the same game, right? But the fan base, I think, is a little bit different in that the last time I went to a baseball game, they had a song for every player. Like that, they would play at every time that player went up to bat, and all of the fans would twirl around their towels or their I don't know what they're called. The things that you clap.
towels.
Yeah.
Oh, those things.
Yeah, these things.
Plastic megaphone thing.
Yeah, and it feels kind of like being at a concert where you're having this like collective effervescence experience and everyone's singing along to the same songs.
But I do think, you know, that your comment that Ogawa and the Housekeeper certainly appreciate what you're saying about the difference with a live game, because the excitement level when they walk in there and they see it and the way she describes it. I mean, there's so few kind of moments of visual beauty in this novel, and that's one of them, right? It's like And then the lights go on and they feel like the lights went on just for them, that special feeling. And, you know, you wonder, you feel like, okay, that's what she went for. That's why she dragged him, even though, you know, like that was anathema to him in some respects, right? She dragged him for that. Yeah. And it is like the kind of core memorable scene.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Whereas I think, relates better to the evening star, which plays another role in the novel. The evening stars. Please.
I just wanted to add to what you were saying about the food, was that also with her making the food for him, she was also making the food for her son. And when you think about before she came there, she didn't come home till 7 o'clock at night, and he must have gone to school early in the morning. So it also helped her be a better mother and more mothering to her son by doing that. And meanwhile, Root is eating different food. He's eating good food. And so it's sort of a combination like that. That's what I wanted to add.
Yeah. Okay, we can have one or two. Yeah, okay. Go ahead.
So, oops, I read the book a little bit differently. I found that it was very much a love story, but it wasn't just one love story. It was a lot of love stories, because I find that Japanese people, I've traveled extensively to Asian countries, they're very subtle. And so this professor loved his math so much. And I found that every time he tried to show his love or like, he would write a mathematical equation or something like that. And as the lady said over there, I thought there was a little bit of a love story between the professor and the sister-in-law. And to calm her down when the housekeeper stays over, he writes her an equation or whatever numbers, and she calms down and rehires the housekeeper. He was teaching math to the little boy. He was teaching math to the housekeeper. So I thought it was a very subtle way of expressing himself, maybe unconsciously, I don't know. But I thought it was so beautiful, because it was not either vulgar or stating. You have to read between the lines. It's like a mystery story. So I really enjoyed the book.
The question is the love. There's a lot of different relations, but for me, the question is whether he's drawing in the housekeeper, the son, and perhaps even the sister-in-law into his love of mathematics. Whether that is the root and source for that is the binding element for the human relations. Which and if that's the case, that's a very original way of telling a, you know, even baseball. Yes, exactly. Right. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. I didn't catch your name. Is it Larkin or Lurkin?
Lernik.
Lernik.
Yes.
Okay. That's a math question. On page 140, there's this discussion of zero and this unnamed Indian mathematician. So I was really fascinated by that. And so if you could just elaborate a little bit more on the concept of zero and how it relates to unity, because Euler's formula ends in zero. And in Buddhism, there's this concept of shunyata, which is emptiness and void, which sometimes people in the West will automatically say, well, it's nothingness, it's zero. But actually it's, and I looked it up real quickly, it describes the absence of inherent independent existence in all phenomena, signifying that things do not possess an essential unchanging nature of their own. So there's a certain kind of unity, but if you could just maybe, whatever you know about, zero.
Yes, so zero, it's a surprise to a lot of people that zero wasn't always there, and it took so many years. I do need to know my numbers, but I don't remember exactly the time that the zero was discovered, but it was way after all of us being comfortable with all the natural numbers, 1, 2, 3, and on. I thought about the void and the emptiness of what that would represent in that equation. The only thing that came to my mind was the the loss of the memory of this professor, maybe. So even though there's this nice uniform unity between all these concepts, but there is an end to it. Maybe that was the only thing that came to my mind. I'm sure probably others may have better interpretation when it comes to the literature behind it. But as a math concept, certainly there is a specific importance to it that it was discovered way later than the usual numbers that we're familiar with. And it was by an Indian. Yeah. Sure.
So we have time for one more question if there is one. Yeah. Okay.
Hi. First of all, the book was great. Thank you so much. With respect to the food, I was thinking that the housekeeper was showing how much she loved the professor by cooking all these different foods. It turned out her job, I think, was a little easy. I think it was mentioned in the book. She felt that the house cleaning wasn't that big of a deal. She got on top of it really quickly. And I think she worried about the professor. He seemed so indifferent to eating. And I think he had invoked such a love of math in her that I think she wanted to do the same. But what I really loved about the book, which I would love to just engage with you guys real time, this setting is not appropriate, but the symbology of pi and I and Euler's constant is, my husband had pointed out that he thought of 3 different ways to assign them, and I thought of a different way to assign them. And it's just, I think it's such a mark of a great book that there's no real right answer, but there's so many layers to unpeel and so many ways to think about it. So thank you so much. It really wasn't a question. It was more just to thank you for such a lovely choice in books.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I'd like to thank our discussants for coming. Thank you very much.
I just wanted to ask one more question about prime numbers because we didn't end up talking about those much. So if the math expert could talk a little bit about why he liked prime numbers so much. And I think the very last math fact of the book was that all prime numbers can be separated into 4n minus 1 or 4n plus 1. And then one other thing about like why 80 minutes. I don't know if you had any insights about any of those. It's another number we didn't talk about so far. Yeah.
About 80 minutes, I don't know. I haven't thought of the 80-minute cycle. But about the prime numbers, so prime numbers are building blocks of all the natural numbers. And that means that any number that you give me, I can write it as multiplication of prime numbers. So they're the ingredients, they're the building blocks of all the natural numbers that if you want to construct a number, you have to use the prime numbers and multiply them out. Certainly there are billions of applications in cryptography, for instance, when it comes to numbers. And as I mentioned, I'm not the number theorist, even with a degree of math. If you're not like very into that particular number theory, it's much harder to discuss it further. But the only thing that I can say is, of course, the building block aspect of the prime numbers being the important ingredients to even construct all the numbers that the professor interested in. There are certainly mentions of twin primes, for instance. Also, the twin primes, the interpretation that I had is that they are they're apart from each other by one even number, so they are still close to each other but not that close. So that may be even the theme of the love in the book, that we're not talking about the physical love, and we're talking about just being close to each other. So that's something that I also got from twin primes. There are tons of mentions of number theory in the book. I wouldn't necessarily say that they were all really like connected in terms of like connecting it somehow to the theme of the book because of my literacy and not being a person in literature. But the mentions of all sorts of the 4n plus 1 and 4n minus 1, those are all number theory concepts. So it clearly shows the author, whoever has introduced her to math, or whatever area that she's familiar with, was number theory. So the concept that she has brought up is all the number theory concepts. Yeah.
Yeah. I never understood I still don't understand the fascination of prime numbers. First thing, they're all odd. Which means that half of the numbers are not prime. How can it be the foundation of mathematics if you have 50%, or let's say 49.9, because it's after 2? That, you know, it's like American politics. Like if you win the election by 50.1%, you're the president, but there's a 49.9% of people who are kind of left out, and so the even numbers are just out in the cold. So,
well, not all the odd numbers are also prime. So
no,
15 is not prime. 15 is 3 times 5. So yes, it's not all the odd numbers.
But I don't. Math is an enigma. I read that quote from G.H. Hardy that the mathematician's patterns, like the painters or poets, must be beautiful. Beauty is the first test. There is no permanent place in the world for ugly mathematics. Pi is a completely ugly number. Pythagoras almost committed suicide when he realized that it was just this. It's a number that had no resolution. It was kind of this bad infinity. You know, it keeps going. So ugly mathematics is a reality, and you know, sometimes mathematics doesn't correspond to its most exalted ideal.
Why don't we have you guys have a debate?
Well, I would have to do too much homework.
John
right. Yes, exactly.
That'll be the solution.
Well, listen, thank you all again for showing up. We appreciate it.